What's up, everyone? Gary Simon of slantaudio.com. So today we're going to take a look at this backing track, and I'm going to show you what the chord progressions are right now, and then we're going to talk about writing solos over it using modes. Here we go. So, the chord progression that is based on is D, and we're just using power chords, and then G, A, back to G, and D. So we only have 3 notes occurring, even though we have 4 measures here. It's D, G, A, G, but the 3 notes are D, G, and A. So we have to identify, using the 7 modes, which modes have those 3 notes, and we can use that as a starting point for how we want to begin a solo. All right, so up here are the 7 different modes, and they're all starting in the key of D. All right, and so the only thing that separates the modes is the series of whole steps and half steps, or their intervals. This is also referred to as tones and semitones. All right, so a whole step on a guitar is 2 frets. That's a whole step, and a half step is 1 fret. All right, so Ionian, for instance, I'm not going to go through all of these. Ionian's series of half steps and whole steps is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. They all have 7 notes, and the only thing that changes is, you know, the order of those whole steps and half steps. So Ionian in the key of G would look like this. This is also known as the major scale. So it's whole step, half step, but we're going to play it down here, that note, because it's easier for playability. Half step, so then we have whole step, whole step, half step. All right, so now I'm going to show you a chart, the same chart where I've highlighted which notes or which modes have the 3 notes that we want. And as we can see, Lydian and Locrian are the only 2 modes that don't have those 3 notes. So if we were, in theory, just to stick within one mode, we wouldn't be able to use Lydian or Locrian for this. And so now what I want to do is do a quick demonstration of how exactly, you know, the modes, when you use them to solo over a backing track with a chord progression going from D, G, A, G, gives flavor or tone or color to, not tone, but color to the sound of the overall composition. So I'm going to first start with Ionian, and Ionian, as you can see, has a D, G, and A, so it will work, and we're going to end up on a D, G, and A, and a G with the flow of the chord progression. So when the chord progression changes, we're going to end on that same note during this very, very, very simple solo. I'm only sticking within the series of 7 notes right here for each of them, and I'm going to use the same exact structure for the 7 modes. And when I mean structure, I'm just going to slide into the very first note, just like that. So it's going to sound different because we're changing up, obviously, the notes and the intervals that we can use these slides and stuff and pull it off into. And don't worry, we're going to make, as we progress throughout this lesson here, we're going to expand the fretboard a little bit more with the knowledge of the 7 different positions, which is in relation to 3 notes per string of each mode, to try to start soloing and targeting the changes of the notes. So let's get started. I'm talking too much with Ionian, using that same formula, and we can see how what type of mood or feel or color it gives us. So let's start here. right, so kind of sounds very happy because as you can hear, we're only using these notes. And let's contrast that by continuing on, and we're going to do Dorian. Now, Dorian is set up to look like the series of half steps and whole steps is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step. All right, so that actually looks like this. If we were to start here on D, it looks like this. Oops, no, whole step right here, then a half step, then we have 3 whole steps, and then we have another one. So it looks like this. All right, so let's see what that sounds like. So the one note that really changed things up between them is right here, because that's the only difference between those two modes up to that point is simply this. So that's Ionian, and Dorian was, and it sounded better to me instead of this. This is way too happy. So it gives it just a little bit of a darker feel, but it still is happy up here, because it has those same notes and those intervals in common. All right, so let's move on to Phrygian. And this order of these modes isn't random. I mean, this is, they're referred to as the first position, second, all the way up to the 7th. And you have Ionian, and then you have Dorian, and then Phrygian. So Phrygian's series of whole steps, it starts off with a half step right away. So at D, all right, so that really gives it an interesting sort of flair. And it goes like this. Now we can see when it comes to the interval breakdown, it does not sound quite as happy. So let's try Phrygian. Up at the very end. I was supposed to slide down to this part. But as you can see, if you just contrast just to the previous two, especially to the first, Ionian definitely sounds a lot darker and more interesting and more kind of like a rock or metal type sense. Let's continue on. So the next one we have is Lydian. Now, Lydian, as you can see, is one of these notes, or one of the modes or the scales that does not include the G. It has a G sharp instead. All right, so Lydian looks like this. If we were to start on D, we have 3 whole steps right away. Right here, we don't have the G. All right, so let's give that one a shot. Uh-oh. So as you can see, we don't have access to that note, and it sounds like crap, of course. So I wasn't even going to continue on with Lydian. However, you're going to see, though, as we progress throughout this lesson, when we get through all 7 of these and we start trying to figure out, okay, how do we write a solo or whatever, you can still use parts of Lydian to get around without, you know, screwing up the entire sound. You'll see how that works a little bit later. All right, so the next one is Mixolydian, and it does have our D, G, and A. And this pattern set up under... it starts off with 2 whole steps, similar to Ionian. but a half step here as well, which is also exactly the same as Lydian at this point. And then this is also the same all the way up until we get to the half step. So in terms of comparing it to Ionian or the major scale. All right, so that's what Mixolydian looks like. So let's try that. And essentially, it's going to sound exactly the same because we're not using any of the other notes. We're just using the first 6 notes. So let's just play it anyhow. Exactly the same as Ionian. Let's move on. Next we have Aeolian, which will work as well. And Aeolian is set up like this. So we have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, and then a whole step, whole step. All right, so all right, let's give that one a shot. Now let's also try one more, which is Locrian. All right, so Locrian, of course, does not have our A, has an A flat, as we can see. And so Locrian looks like this if we're to start on the D once again. All right, so let's give that a shot. And it breaks down. All right, so those are the 7 modes, obviously set up only using their 7 notes, just to create a very simple lead part over him. And you can see how each one definitely gives it a different mood or a tone or a feel or color, if you will. All right, so I personally like the sound of Phrygian out of all 7 of those. And so again, Phrygian looks like this. All right, and now I'm going to show you, I'm going to overlay at the bottom here, D Phrygian. All right, so these are all of the 7 positions that are actually connected. And if I fast forward to the next slide, we'll see these are all the D notes that I've highlighted. I've made the other ones a little bit more opaque so that we can easily see them. And so when you're starting out a solo, you can, if you want to start on the same exact note of the chord progression, these are all the available locations. And they're all over the neck, obviously, as we can see. And we could start off with Phrygian in any of those positions. So for instance, we'll see that Phrygian here on the A string on D looks like this. Now this pattern, the series of whole steps and half steps or tones and semitones, it stays the same, but the shape may change depending on which D you're starting on. For instance, what if we wanted to start here? What would that shape look like? Well, because of the strange tuning that we have in standard tuning, we have on our B string, things have to be adjusted by a half step or a semitone. So the shape looks like this. All right, it doesn't look like the same shape, but it actually is. If you recognize that the B string, if you dropped it down this way, towards the neck just by 1 fret or 1/2 step, it would still look the same. But it sounds the same if we were to play it as shown below. All right, so here's the full shape of position 3. So there's 7 positions if we're talking about 3 notes per string. And this is the Phrygian position, otherwise known as the 3rd position. You should learn, honestly, all 7. And you'll see how that becomes important a little bit later on in this lesson. So this position, and the reason I'm showing it on this D instead of this one is because we have all 6 strings if we start in this area. Doesn't mean you have to start here when you're starting a solo, but if you want to see the full position that you should practice and memorize across all 7 positions, it looks and sounds like this. All right. If I were to highlight other notes, for instance, going down like over here, we would go into the 2nd position, which is Dorian. And just keep them going on. And then the 1st position after that, or before that, is Ionian, or the major scale. So I can keep on going and going, but I think you get the point. Definitely look at charts and diagrams on like Google Images, or for example, to find out what those 7 positions are for 3 notes per string, and learn them, but plus also learn the shapes, but also learn how to go between them. One thing that I did was I would start on the G. And just keep on going up. So that was position 1, or Ionian, 2, which is Dorian, and then 3. Actually, I screwed up 3. 3 was supposed to be Phrygian. I was doing Lydian instead. But yeah, going in sequential order back and forth is going to help your soloing, and especially improvising live on the spot. So continuing on, let's say for instance, what I'm showing here, and I have a couple different colored dots, is I'm showing just the position of Phrygian. And the one thing that's changing, however, is we don't see the full position because we're starting on a different string, 1 string down on the A string. So we don't see the full position because we don't have another string down here to make continue. Now notice that 2 of the dots are a teal color, a bluish color, and the other ones is a purple type of color. That's simply to help us realize where the chord progression changes are. So the green, or the blue dots rather, are where our G note is, and that's the 2nd change in the chord progression. And then we have our A notes, which are purple. And the very first starting note on right here, of course, is D. So you'll see, now I'm going to create just a very, very simple solo, utilizing just this position only to create a very simple, like I said, solo over the backing track. So that didn't sound bad. I mean, just using 1 shape, we've created an okay, interesting sounding solo using Phrygian, or in other words, the 3rd position. But what if we wanted to send up the neck into other shapes to target other notes? Well, right here, I'm showing you the 2nd, or no, not the 2nd, but the 4th position, or the next position up from what we just played, which is Phrygian. The next position up here that I'm going to show you is Lydian. Now, if you recall earlier, when we were going through the 7 modes and which of those 3 notes, D, G, A, fit within them, I said Lydian, or I noted that Lydian didn't have those 3 notes. But that's still okay. You can still use this chord, or this scale shape, in order to get up the neck and target other notes. So to see the full actual shape of the 4th position, which is Lydian, we can start up here, targeting that note here on the 11th fret, and it looks like this. So this here is Lydian. All right, but again, because we want to ascend up and stay around the same area, we'll start it here instead of here. All right, so this is what we're now going to confine ourselves between 2 shapes, which is Phrygian and Lydian. So not exactly the greatest solo, but I was just kind of winging it. And I'm able to do so, though, because I understand the relationship between the modes, and specifically speaking, Phrygian and Lydian, here specifically starting on this string. But it doesn't matter where you start. The shapes are always the same, no matter where you played it. So if you wanted to do a Phrygian, you would just start up here instead. And then this would be a sharp Phrygian right here, or not Phrygian, but Lydian. All right, so they're all the same. So memorize those shapes. We can even take it a step further and extend to a 3rd position, and that would be Mixolydian, which would start right here. All right. So I've outlined and extended this to those 3 positions, starting right here. This here, of course, is Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. And I've also, of course, outlined the notes that we want to try to target. You don't always have to target the exact note itself. There are other complementary notes that would work. But just, for starters, for making things simple, let's see what it'll look like if we just utilized those 3 positions. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to hit every single note of the position. In fact, that's pretty, that would be lame, kind of, unless you're doing a really fast run or something. It's nice to change things up. But let's see what it would look like if we extended it to 3 positions in just one of many possible combinations of notes. All right, again, not the most polished and great solo, but you can see that with the knowledge, again, between the 7 shapes and thus the modes, the 7 modes, the fretboard knowledge and understanding how to transition in and out of them from every position, from every string, really will just open up the fretboard entirely. So that is basically it, and that is the takeaway. So of course, you can have access to the backing track, which is free at slantaudio.com, where you can use it to try to create your own solo using that backing track if you wish. It just requires an email, and that's it. And then you have access to all the other tutorials and backing tracks and resource files and tabs and all of that good stuff. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.